And a presidential election next year, it's imperative that you're registered and ready to vote. Each and every one of your local supervisors of elections wants you to be registered to vote. They don't care about what party you belong to or any of that stuff. They want you to have the ability to vote should you choose to do so. This is a privilege that not everybody around the world has. In Focus's Jeff Butera caught up with Congresswoman Laurel Lee, the former Florida Secretary of State, to talk about the importance of voting and being registered to vote.
Congresswoman Laurel Lee, thanks so much for joining us on In Focus today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you here. So we're going to talk about voting today, and I did want to start with a personal story. So I turned 18 in the year 2000, a couple months before the 2000 election. I was in Florida at the time, so my very first election that I voted in was the 2000 presidential election, one of the most memorable elections of all time. What was your first voting experience like?
Well, I will tell you that the story that I like to tell about voting was actually a little bit later. It's not my first experience, but it was one that I'll never forget because I actually, for the first time, had a friend who was running for office, and he was in a runoff, and it was a rainy day. I was busy at work. It was difficult to get to the polls. But I still went and voted, and it was one of those elections that ended up being decided by just a handful of votes. And, you know, that happens so often, all up and down the ballot, that these races can be decided by just a few votes. So for me, I never forgot just how important it was that every single vote matters, every single voice matters in our elections.
And imagine the guilt if you hadn't made it to the ballot box.
Absolutely.
So if there is somebody who is watching at home right now who is not registered to vote, and maybe thinks, why bother? How would you convince them why it's so important?
Well, you know, I think this is how we express our priorities. This is how we tell our elected representatives what matters to us. You know, is it the economy? Is it jobs? Is it education? What are the things that are important to you? So, you know, I believe the thing that is really vital about voting is recognizing that this is our way to express to our government what we want to see happen, what's important to us, and to make sure that our voices are heard and then represented at all levels of government.
I mentioned that you're in Congress now, but
Yes.
you have a unique perspective in that you were Secretary of State in our state from 2019 to 2022, so you oversaw the election process. What was the hardest thing about doing that job on such a big task?
Well, you know, we can be very proud of our elections in Florida. And, you know, for us, of course, we have 67 counties, and the partnership between state and local election officials is really what leads to Florida's success. You know, today, you mentioned the election in 2000, but, you know, over the course of the last couple of decades, Florida has really grown to be a leader on a national scale in terms of our election policy, our election administration. You know, we're one of the states where you know you're going to see results that you can count on, a lot of election integrity. The challenge is making sure that we are continually building those relationships, making sure that there is a seamless level of cooperation from state and local election officials, and also focusing on protecting our cyber and physical infrastructure. That was a very big part of my job as Secretary of State. And we say sometimes that it's a race with no finish line. Working on making sure that our cyber and physical infrastructure is protected and is ready to go for all of the next challenges is something that our elections officials will constantly be working on.
You kind of anticipated where I was going to go with one of my questions, which was in 2000, Florida was ridiculed for what happened because of the hanging chads and the butterfly ballots and quite frankly, just confusion over the voting process. Yet in 2020, Florida was praised because it was a very efficient election. There were numbers coming in efficiently that night. Was 2000 looked at as sort of this moment where we have to learn from this, we have to change and be better? And what did change?
Absolutely. And that is one of the, you know, silver linings that comes from an experience like that, is it causes your state and your leaders to look at what went right, what didn't, what do we need to invest in, what do we need to fix. And a number of things have happened since then. We've modernized voting equipment. Every county in the state now has equipment that is modern, that is effective, that has been tested and certified by the state. And we also took a close look at policies. And, you know, we're very fortunate that here in Florida we have a governor and a state legislature that is continually looking at our election-related policies and what works and what doesn't. And, you know, one of the things that is really important to Florida standing out is that we require our ballots to be received on Election Day. There's a narrow exception for our overseas voters, but we have ballots come in, whether it's in person, early voting, or voting by mail, by Election Day. And that allows us to tabulate those ballots and have those results, even though we're the third most populous state in the country, to still have those election results on Election Day, which is a big factor in voter confidence.
And another thing that Florida does is that we count those early ballots ahead of time. We're not announcing the numbers or anything, but those ballots are counted ahead of time, which does not happen in other states, Pennsylvania included. If people are wondering why it is that Pennsylvania is taking so long to count their votes and Florida's already done on election night, that's that choice that was made. Do you think all states should be doing it the way Florida does it?
Actually, I do, and you're absolutely right, because there is a process about checking to verify, does the signature match? Did this ballot come in from the voter to whom it was sent? You know, because we do have a process to maintain that chain and maintain the integrity of the ballot, it takes some time. So, you know, for states that have different policy decisions where, for example, they'll accept a ballot that is postmarked on Election Day, that is building in inherently a delay in being able to receive those ballots, canvass those ballots, get those ballots counted. So when I go around and talk with groups about, you know, what are some of the things, what are some of the top 10 things that Florida does right that I think would be a great thing to implement in other states, that is very high on my list, is having ballots received and due on Election Day so that you can be prepared to actually provide those results quickly.
We are at a tense time when it comes to election where it's a balancing act between, can we make it easy for people to vote, an easy process, but at the same time protecting the integrity of the election? And there are differing sides on this and where we should stand on that. Where do you stand on this, and how do we move forward with a better system to accomplish those two things?
Well, I'll say, you just touched on something that as elections officials we frequently say, that when it comes to voting, it should be easy to vote and hard to cheat. And in Florida, we hit such a great balance of ensuring that we've given voters multiple methods to cast their ballot, but in each case, we have strong safeguards in place to protect the integrity of that vote. We also do things every election cycle, including the testing and certifying of voting equipment. Pre- and post-election audits are already done. They're in Florida law, so every election cycle those are done. And another thing that's important for voters to know is that these processes are actually open to the public. So anyone who has questions about how our election system works or what we're doing to ensure the security and integrity of the voting process can go on down, meet their supervisor of elections, watch those pre- and post-election audits, and really get a great sense of just how much we're doing to keep the process safe. I also always recommend that somebody who might be interested in elections and knowing more can volunteer as an election worker. It is such a great civic experience to get out and help that elections process work, and it leaves the voter with so much more information and knowledge and experience about how the process works.
The harsh reality is that there is a fair amount of distrust at this point on both sides. There are a large chunk of Republicans who believe that the 2020 election was fraudulent, that it was rigged, that former President Trump won that election and should still be in office. At the same time, there are Democrats who believe that even in Florida, there is an effort to try to make it harder for people who might tend to vote Democratic to vote. And they have a distrust of the system as well. How scary of a situation is that? Is that a problem? Do we need to address that aspect of this too?
We absolutely need to be talking about that. So, you know, when it comes to administering elections, the first thing we need to do is make sure we're getting it right, that we're having elections that are secure, that are accurate, integrity we can count on. But another important role for elections officials is to make sure that we're communicating that to the public, that we're sharing with the public what we're doing, why they should, how open and transparent and accountable it is to them, where they can come and participate in this process, and why they should have confidence in it. So I know that in Florida, we're very fortunate to have 67 67 supervisors of elections from all across the state, big counties, small counties, all kinds of different demographics, and they're all committed to making sure that they're working with their residents in their county to make sure that they're communicating this good information, that voters should, and absolutely we have to work on this and make sure that voters understand that we've got great processes, we've got good security, and that it's something that they can participate in and be confident about.
Got about a minute left, so one more question. You're now in Congress. Does the federal government have any role in elections? Should they have any role in elections, or should this be kept with the state and the local government?
So the Constitution gives primary authority to administer elections to the state. That being said, there is a role for Congress, and I believe Congress can and should support states where we can. We actually have a bill in Congress right now that will do quite a number of things, including providing resources, providing best practices, a clearinghouse where states can come and look and see what other states are doing, and make sure that we're providing technological and expert support for states who need it, to try to help make sure that every place across America has the resources, the information, and support that they need so that we can have good, strong elections like Florida's everywhere in America.
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your time.